Президент Российской Федерации Владимир Владимирович Путин.
Good afternoon. I beg you. Good afternoon. Dear deputies of the Federal Assembly, senators, deputies of the State Duma, dear citizens of Russia, I am delivering today's address at a difficult time. We all know it well. A milestone time for our country. At a time of cardinal, irreversible changes throughout the world. At a time of major historical events that determine the future of our country and our people. And step by step, carefully and consistently, we will solve the tasks before us. Since 2014, Donbas has been fighting. It has been defending the right to live on its own land, to speak its native language. It fought and did not give up in the conditions of the blockade and constant shelling. Undisguised hatred on the part of the Kiev regime. It believed and waited for Russia to come to the rescue. Meanwhile, and you know it well, we did everything possible, really everything possible, to solve this problem by peaceful means. We patiently negotiated a peaceful way out of this most difficult conflict. But, behind our back, a completely different scenario was being prepared. The promises of the Western rulers, their assurances about the desire for peace in the Donbas turned out to be, as we now see, a forgery, a cruel lie. They simply played for time. Engaged in chicanery, turned a blind eye to political assassinations, to the repressions of the Kiev regime against objectionable people in Western academies and schools. They trained the officers of the nationalist battalions. They supplied them with weapons. And I want to emphasize that even before the start of the special military operation, Kiev was negotiating with the West on the supply of air defense systems, combat aircraft, and other heavy equipment to Ukraine. We also remember the attempts of the Kiev regime to acquire nuclear weapons because they spoke about it publicly. The USA and NATO rapidly deployed their army bases and secret biological laboratories near the borders of our country. During the maneuvers, they mastered the theater of future military operations. They were preparing the Kiev regime subject to them, Ukraine, enslaved by them, for a big war. And today they admit it. They admit it publicly, openly, without hesitation. They seem to be proud, reveling in their treachery, calling both the Minsk agreements and the Normandy format a diplomatic performance, a bluff. It turns out that all the time when the Donbas was on fire, when blood was shed, when Russia sincerely, I want to emphasize this, it was Russia sincerely striving for a peaceful solution. They were playing on people's lives. They were playing, in fact, as they say in well-known circles, marked cards. This disgusting method of deception has already been tried by them more than once before. They behaved just as shamelessly. duplicitously, destroying Yugoslavia, Iraq, Libya, Syria. From this shame they will never be washed off. The concepts of honor, trust, decency are not for them. Over the long centuries of colonialism, dictate, hegemony, they are used to the fact that everything is allowed to them.
The Indians formerly subsisted on game, fish, acorns, etc. But it is now impossible for them to make a living by hunting or fishing, for nearly all the game has been driven from the mining region or has been killed by the thousands of our people who now occupy the once quiet home of these children of the forest. Edward A. Stevenson.
Near the crowded goldfields, Indians found it harder and harder to find food. Some began to steal. The miners despised them all as diggers. One California law made it legal to declare any jobless Indian a vagrant, then auction his services off for up to 4 months. And it permitted whites to force Indian children to work for them until they were 18, provided the permission of what the law called a friend was obtained first. Whites hunted down adult Indians in the mountains, kidnapped their children, and sold them as apprentices for as little as $50. If ever an Indian was fully and honestly paid for his labor, one white settler said, it was not my luck to hear of it. Indians could not complain in court because by another California statute, no Indian or black or mulatto person was permitted to give evidence in favor of or against a white person.
The miners are sometimes guilty of the most brutal acts with the Indians. Such incidents have fallen under my notice that would make humanity weep and men disown their race. William Swain.
We hope that the government will render such aid as will enable the citizens of the North to carry on a war of extermination until the last redskin of these tribes has been killed. Extermination is no longer a question of time. The time has arrived. The work has commenced. And let the first man that says treaty or peace be regarded as a traitor. Eureka Herald, 1853.
Indians continued to die from diseases the white man had inadvertently introduced among them. But now, thousands more were being killed deliberately.
The bold volunteers crept on them before day and killed about 9 men, the balance escaping. The women and children remained, trusting that an American would not murder women and children. In this they were mistaken. The Americans searched around among the haystacks with a hatchet and split the children's heads open. In this way, there were over 40 women and children butchered.
The towns of Marysville and Honey Lake paid bounties for Indian scalps. Shasta City offered $5 for every Indian head brought to City Hall. And California's state treasury reimbursed many of the local governments for their expenses.
It was of no unfrequent occurrence for an Indian to be shot down in cold blood, or a squaw to be raped by some brute. Such a thing as a white man being punished for outraging an Indian was unheard of. It was the fable of the wolf and the lamb every time. General George Crook.
There were some 150,000 Indians in California before the 49ers came. By 1870, there would be fewer than 30,000. It was the worst slaughter of Indian peoples in United States history.
They used to spit on the whole world. It turned out that they treat the peoples of their own countries just as disdainfully. Like a master. They also cynically deceive them. Or deceive them with fables about the search for peace. About adherence to the UN Security Council resolutions on Donbas. Indeed, the Western elites have become a symbol of total unprincipled lies. We firmly defend not only our interests, but also our position. That in the modern world there should be no division into the so-called civilized countries and all the rest. That an honest partnership is needed, which in principle denies any exclusivity, especially aggressive. We were open and sincerely ready for a constructive dialogue with the West. We have said and insisted that both Europe and the whole world need an indivisible security system equal for all states. And for many years we have offered our partners to discuss this idea together and work on its implementation. But, in response, we received an indistinct or hypocritical reaction. This is about words. But there were also concrete actions. This is the expansion of NATO to our borders. This is the creation of new missile defense position areas in Europe and Asia. They decided to hide behind this umbrella from us. This is the deployment of military contingents. And not only near the borders of Russia. I want to emphasize that. In fact, it is well known to everyone that no country in the world has such a number of military bases abroad as the United States of America. There are hundreds of them. I want to emphasize this. Hundreds of bases around the world. The whole planet is littered with them. You just need to look at the map. The whole world has seen them pull out of fundamental armaments agreements, including the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. They unilaterally tore apart the fundamental agreements that maintain world peace. For some reason, they did it. They don't do anything just like that. As you know, Finally, in December 2021, we officially sent draft security assurance treaties to the United States and NATO. But, in fact, on all key fundamental positions for us, we received, in fact, a direct refusal. Then it finally became clear that they had given the command to implement aggressive plans. It's understandable, right? For the war 150 and the poorest countries, which they allegedly constantly care about, 60. But this is under the well-known requirements of obedience on the part of the recipient countries of this money. And where is all their talk about the fight against poverty and about sustainable development? About the environment? Where did it all go? Where has it all gone? At the same time, the flow of money for the war does not decrease. Also, they spare no expense to encourage unrest and upheaval in other countries. And, again, around the world. At a recent conference in Munich, there were endless accusations against Russia. One gets the impression that they did this only so that everyone would forget what the so-called West has done in recent decades. But it was they who let the genie out of the bottle. They plunged entire regions into chaos, according to American experts themselves, as a result of wars. I want to draw attention to this. We did not come up with these figures. The Americans themselves give them. As a result of the wars that the United States unleashed after 2001, almost 900,000 people died. More than 38 million people became refugees. All this they now simply want to erase from the memory of mankind. They pretend that none of this happened. But no one in the world has forgotten this and will not forget. None of them take into account human casualties and tragedies. Because, of course, trillions and trillions of dollars are at stake. For which the Ukrainian people are, in fact, a stranger. The current Ukrainian regime serves not national interests, but the interests of third countries. The West is using Ukraine both as a battering ram against Russia and as a training ground. I will not dwell on the West's attempts to turn the tide of hostilities, on their plans to increase military supplies. Everyone knows this in detail. But one circumstance should be clear to everyone. The more long-range Western strike systems will come to Ukraine, the further we will be forced to move this threat away from our borders. It's naturally. The elites of the West do not hide their goal. It is, as they say, it is direct speech. To inflict a strategic defeat on Russia. What does it mean? For us? What is it? This means finishing with us once and for all. That is, they intend to transfer a local conflict into a phase of global confrontation. This is how we understand all this. And we will react accordingly. Because in this case we are talking about the existence of our country. But they also cannot but be aware that it is impossible to defeat Russia on the battlefield. So they are conducting more and more aggressive information attacks against us. First of all, of course, they choose young people, young generations as their target. And here again they lie constantly. They distort historical facts. They do not stop attacking our culture, the Russian Orthodox Church, and other traditional religious organizations of our country. See what they do to their own peoples. The destruction of the family, cultural and national identity, perversion, abuse of children, up to pedophilia. All this is declared the norm of their life. And they force the clergy to bless same-sex marriages. God bless them. Let them do what they want. What do I want to say here? Adults have the right to live the way they want. We treated it like that in Russia. And we will always treat it like that. Nobody invades privacy. And we are not going to do it. But I want to tell them, look, excuse me, the sacred scriptures, the main books of all other world religions, everything is said there, including the fact that the family is the union of a man and a woman. But these sacred texts are now being questioned. The Anglican Church, for example, is reported to be planning, while still planning, to consider the idea of a gender-neutral God. What can I say? Forgive me, Lord. They don't know what they're doing. Millions of people in the West understand that they are being led to a real spiritual catastrophe. The elites, frankly, are just going crazy. And it seems that there is no cure. But this is their problem, as I said. And we have an obligation to protect our children. And we will do it. We will protect our children from degradation and from degeneration. It is obvious that the West will try to undermine and split our society, to rely on national traitors, who of all times, I want to emphasize this, have the same poison of contempt for their own fatherland and the desire to make money on the sale of this poison to those who is willing to pay for it. It's always been that way. Whoever embarked on the path of direct betrayal, committing terrorist and other crimes against the security of our society, the territorial integrity of the country, will be held accountable under the law. But we will never be like the Kiev regime and the Western elites who are and have been engaged in witch hunting before.